Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. The topic is migrating to S/4HANA. Learn how you can analyze custom code impact to your implementation in less than 1 week. My name is Mathangi, and I'm a project manager here at Terra Information Group. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. All participants will remain on mute during the session. If you have a question for our presenter, please type it in the question box in your participant panel. If we are unable to get to your question during the session, we will be sure to follow up afterwards. Today's presentation is being recorded. A link to the recording will be sent to all registered attendees shortly after the session. Now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. Randy Ridenour is our Senior Vice President of Sales at Terra Information Group. Mamta Agarwal is Managing Partner at Terra Information Group. Jens Strandbergard, Founder, CEO, Geckobrain. Ravi Pusuluri, VP Business Development at Geckobrain. And Deepen Vadodaria, VP Technology at Geckobrain. And now I will turn it over to Mamta for carrying on the rest of the presentation. Jens, if you could please share your screen, we'll be able to see the slides. Thank you.
You just need to make me a presenter again. That option was lost.
Okay, I will do that right now.
Thank you.
Give me one moment. I think that one went offline. Give me a minute. Okay, here you go. This should work. Okay, we can see your screen. Thank you, Jens. Mamta, over to you.
Thank you, Mathangi, and thank you, Jens, for running the show. Can you, next slide, please? So just brief introduction about who Terra Information Group is and what we do. TIG is a SAP partner since 1997, and we have implemented over 100 implementations of in different SAP domains, and S/4HANA migration is one of our fortes. So TIG has implemented several, helped with several clients with S/4HANA migrations. And we start off with a small success story where TIG was involved with a large cargo-based company, helping them improve their business processes and migrate them from SAP on-premise to S/4HANA. And that's where, again, it was a very successful implementation with implementing key processes and the FI module, controlling business warehouse, business objects, plant maintenance, materials management, sales and distribution, and HR. So, but one of the pitfalls we found that the implementation, the length of the implementation timeline was kind of long, and we started looking for different ways to optimize, some of these migration tasks that were taking so long. And we partnered with Geckobrain to use the code remediation automation tool, which actually cut down the reduction. We actually reduced the implementation by almost 40%. And the total implementation cost was reduced by more than 10 to 15%. So that's where the whole, the birth of Geckobrain and our automation tool started. Next slide, please. So some of the differentiators about TIG and what we do differently from other implementations partner. Again, we are an implementation partner with SAP since 1997. We live, breathe, and sleep the SAP technology. We walk the path with them all throughout since 1997. We've won numerous rewards and recognitions for several projects and different domains. We have TIG always continuously makes an attempt to try and improvise on our implementation life cycle, the length, the cost, all of that. And so far, we have built almost about 18 assets to accelerate our S/4HANA implementations. We have also a close partnership with SAP, which helps us stay on the leading edge of the technology. In fact, we are involved with some teams from SAP Germany, where they actually build a product. Total cost of service is always balanced between delivering some high quality and a value-based proposition. All right, and all of our consultants are highly experienced in the industry, in different industries. I can't really think of any industry that we have not touched so far. So on average, TIG consultant has at least minimum of 10+ years of experience on an average. All right, and of course, our philosophy is to work in close partnership with our clients. We're really not a vendor, but a partner, where we walk the whole journey with you hand in hand, holding each other and making sure that we reach a point where the product brings a lot of value to our customer and gives us success. Your success is our success. So that was in short about TIG, and now I'll hand it over to Jens and to give us some insight into what Geckobrain does and how it can benefit all of us. So Jens, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I just had to go back and unmute myself. Yes, here we are. I'll get this up. So we've decided as part of this that we can offer 10 attendees today access to Geckobrain Insights for 3 months, and I'll show you in a second what Insights looks like and what it can do. And in order to take advantage of this, please reach out to Randy on this email address, and then we'll talk to you about the next steps in order to provide you access to the Geckobrain slides here, the Geckobrain Insights product. I'm trying to see if I can get my screen working again. Since I have a very slow computer today, that's a given when we do presentations. So about Geckobrain, as mentioned, we have a very, very close relationship with Terra Information Group, and our background is very, very nerdy. We have the company is founded by technical experts in SAP ABAP developers with between 20 and 30 years of experience each. And everything we do in one way or another leads down to the technical layer of SAP. Our interest really is how the custom code is working. And we know that a lot of our customers have invested millions of dollars in custom code development over the years. And by moving to S/4HANA, all of a sudden thinking greenfield and starting everything from scratch is sometimes a very difficult discussion to have with the board or with the executive team, because again, it's a lot of money that's been invested, and should that money just be thrown out the window, or is it possible to extend the life of those investments? So that's why we're looking at the custom code from a very holistic point of view, like the 360-degree view on the custom code, to figure out which custom code actually creates extraordinary value, which custom code actually brings competitive advantages or savings or anything like that, and how do they perform in the productive environment, and how they're impacted by, for instance, HANA issues, so that the code that is brought over to S4HANA actually has value and is useful to bring over. So this is the key to what we do. We figure out how processes are connected to custom code in order to figure out where the value lies. So if you look at the Geckobrain tools from a sort of a phased approach, you can say at the very basic level, it's all about optimization of custom code. It's also about optimization if you move the code to HANA, but that's more of a static optimization because the code will probably not run on HANA. But if you look at the custom code in basic terms, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, SAP was more monolithic, even completely monolithic at some point. But today it's more like a humongous web application, and a lot of external programs have been connected to SAP, connecting into endpoints, using and very often misusing SAP. So you'll have a lot of web applications calling into SAP, Fiori apps, order data services, and so forth. And web application developers don't necessarily think about how they use SAP and what kind of strain they're putting on SAP. So in order to take a look at that, we analyze all those gateways as well. And in that, we've been able to help customers save up to 25% of the data transfer between application server and database. You can say that is valuable if you're running on-prem, but it's extremely valuable if you're running in the cloud, because in the cloud you actually pay for these things. So sending too much data is just cost that could have been avoided. So understanding that and minimizing that traffic of data is very, very valuable. So that's part of the housekeeping that we often do, and customers use Geckobrain for long before migration. So install Geckobrain today and start optimizing tomorrow. And then when you're ready to HANA, to move to HANA, you'll have optimized the custom code to a certain extent. The next step, when we start talking about S4 migrations, assessing the S4 HANA migration readiness is really important, understanding what's the actual impact of the S4 HANA simplifications, because 2 or 3 major things happen when you move to S4 HANA. One thing is, of course, that the database has changed. That means the traditional SQL calls don't necessarily work on a HANA database. Secondly, the application layer changes, and thirdly, the data model has changed. So this means that in order for the custom code to run on S4 HANA, you'll have to take note of the simplifications that SAP has released. And we scan against those simplifications to figure out what the impact is. But a simplification isn't just a simplification. Some simplifications are quite easy and can be done very quickly. The fixes are very doable and can be done very quickly. Others are much more complex when code has been deprecated or functionality has been deprecated in S4HANA and requires some sort of refactoring. But we find out what the complexity is and how impacted the system is by the simplifications, and also provide a pretty precise estimate of how much time is actually needed. So we take sort of the unknown out of the code migration, because we can see if it's possible to migrate or not and how fast it can be done. Now, in some cases, it turns out it's 50 days work and all the code could be moved to S4HANA. In other cases, it's much more than that, 500 days, 1,000 days, 2,000 days, even 5,000 days. So those projects are very complex, and that means, do you want to spend 2,000 days fixing your custom code before you move it to S4HANA, or do you want to do some optimization there and then selectively figure out which code is relevant to bring over to S4HANA? So for that, we can analyze the business processes and understand how they are connected to the transaction codes underneath, and how those transaction codes are connected to custom codes at the very bottom technical layer. And that allows you to sort of scope the migration project and get rid of all the code that doesn't actually do anything of value, and focus on the code that has real value, and fix and move that code only, allowing you to minimize those humongous migration tasks by in some cases up to 80%. We've seen. So this is sort of the the background for what Geckobrain does: optimization, S4HANA assessment, and business process optimization. So now I'll go straight to my screen here, and I'll simply show you what it looks like. So we'll see if you can see my screen. I'm guessing it's still is still on. Otherwise, please let me know, because I'm not entirely sure what I've shared. I hope I've shared everything. So the technical migration of SAP, as mentioned, is a very technical exercise. It's a question of, in practical terms, of changing, fixing missing order bys, because with a HANA database, there's no natural index. That means that you have to order the results when you call to the database. So missing order bys are very important. They need to be fixed. And secondly, there can be a performance impact because calling into the database without specifically asking for the fields that you need, because it's a column-based database. In that case, it can be a very long and slow response time and put a lot of strain on the server. So there can also be some optimization in the performance. It might not be necessary to do before the migration. We can easily, monitor the performance before, during, and after. And then instead of fixing everything, you can fix what's necessary. But if you look at it from a kind of a one-time or a view here, what we're seeing is that SAP Code Inspector itself has found 550 issues, priority 1 issues that need to be fixed. And if we filter the code away that's not in use using UPL or SCMon, so uses procedure logging or the call stack, that means that instead of 550, only 244 issues are necessary to fix. So again, that's about 50%, even less than 50%. Out of those 244, we can actually fix 230 automatically with Geckobrain. So that means that only 14 issues remain to be fixed manually. So that's a bit of a saving from the 550 initial issues that have been found. When we go to the priority 2 issues, it's the same thing. Again, they are performance related, so it might not make any sense to fix them before a move, but it could be done. But instead of fixing all 16,000, we have found out that only 918 are relevant to fix. The rest can be ignored. And out of those, we can fix about half automatically. Again, if we run this based on real-time data in the migration process, we often see that instead of fixing 918 or 312 objects, as you can see here, maybe it's only 10 objects that are necessary to fix. It could be, one could be a program that runs, once a month for the finance director for about 5 minutes. Spending a lot of time fixing and testing that might not make any sense. Whereas a replenishment program or something would make a lot of sense to fix. So taking a look at that, this could also be scoped very often quite dramatically. When we talk S4HANA, things become slightly more complex because with S4HANA, as mentioned, now the data model changes and the application layer changes. So in this case, we are going to have to look at the simplification items. So just scroll down here first and show you what we find. Again, we're basing everything off SAP standard data sources. So in this case, you can see how this customer, which is an automotive customer, have been impacted by simplifications. And you can slice and dice all this to understand, how impacted are we in the various areas. That gives a good overview. Again, of course, an automotive customer will be impacted very heavily in logistics. But the interesting piece is up here. This is where we start looking at not only the number of issues, but how complex they are, ranging from extra small to extra large. And extra small, small, and medium, they are the ones that can definitely be fixed. That means it's just a change in a code line, and they're good to go. So that means it's definitely doable to move all this code to S4HANA. It's just a matter of time and work. And again, this could potentially also be filtered if you run a code decommissioning project beforehand. Maybe 50% could be gone, but it's still something that's very doable and technically easy to do. It's just work. Large and extra large are slightly more complex, or quite a lot more complex. That means that now these can't necessarily be fixed. So in the case of the extra large and the large, in this case, there's only one of each, which means this customer could quite easily move to S4HANA because there's only one extra large, only one large, and they're the ones that will need some kind of reprogramming, refactoring of the code, because it's typically because of deprecated functionality in SAP. If we take a look at it, we can actually go in and see, what is the actual issue. So we have the extra large here. There's just one. we can see it's in SAP. It's because they've been using SAP Patient Management, and that functionality is not available in S4. And if you drill in deeper, we can go and have a look at the actual program that's affected by this. So this particular program is the only one with an issue that can't necessarily be fixed unless the code is refactored. So this text editor history program. And what does it do? Well, you can see in each line 12, 13, 32, so forth, how they're impacted and what's going on. And the only question then becomes, okay, do you need this program in S4HANA? Does it do anything of value? Often we see these where there's an extra large issue. That's because the developer has used, has probably done something for a hospital early on, and now they've done something for a automotive customer, and they're just reusing the same code. It might be that this text editor history sits in an element that is not really necessary. It doesn't sound like something that is, overly value creating, I must say. So it's worthwhile understanding what's this program doing. Is it worthwhile fixing it or not? And in order to do that, in order to start, collecting these various elements into something that is a little more coherent, we have a feature which we call solution components. So what it is that it's a collection of clusters of custom code, you can say, in specific business process steps, integration elements, or whatever. And this is where you can start collecting the various elements in order to figure out what's actually necessary to move, what's important to move, what creates value, and then collate the various custom code under those elements, so that you can start focusing very specifically on the code that you need to fix. So for instance, this customer has in MM identified their Ariba procurement integration as one of the elements they need to bring over to SAP. Now, once that decision has been made, the only question becomes, okay, which code is then relevant? And we found these 17 objects as part of their Ariba procurement integration. So if they want to bring over their Ariba procurement integration, then in that case, they need to fix these 17 custom objects. And if we go and have a look at them, we're back at where we were before. So in line 184, in this particular program, they have an issue with the material number field length extension. So a very simple fix, and fix this, and the code is ready to run on S4HANA. And how do we find these collections of custom code? So this is where we have the business process mining, which is typically the third step. So if you remember my initial slides, that we have the optimization, we have the S4HANA view, and we have the business process mining. This is typically the last step where we start helping customers scope the project. So figuring out what's actually important to move and what's not important to move. So in this case, we can scan any module. This customer is running SD. So if I choose order as a starting event, I'll actually see the entire order to cash process in here. And this is all based on data, so it's fact-driven entirely. There's no interviews involved, there's no business blueprints or process templates or anything involved. This is actually based on data 100%. So it's very factual what we're looking at here. You can attach multiple systems to Geckobrain in order to, for instance, compare between two different systems. You can see if there are any differences in business processes between, let's say, two SAP systems, two business units, whatever you want to consolidate in S4HANA. But you can also go in and have a look. In this case, we're looking at the order to cash process, and there's a zoom level of 20 to 100. That means we have filtered 20%, excuse me, 20% of the business away. So this is 80% of the volume in this particular business that we're looking at here. You can also define sub-processes, so process variants, however you want to. So that could, excuse me, it could be, if you want, for instance, for an SD process, it could be that you want to have a look at the specific product groups or plants or countries. You can define that however you want to define it. And once it's been defined by the metrics on the in the document flow, we will find those sub-processes. And in this case, we found 4 or 5 defined processes. Here's one called footer original, and this is food for animals for this particular customer. They deliver products to farmers, and one of those products is food for the animals. And if we look at each of these steps, you can see delivery. If I click on delivery, I can actually see all the delivery nodes. So this means I'm now looking at a very specific sub-process that covers the order to cash process for a very specific process, in this case, food for animals. But the interesting part is that I can also dig deeper, so I can go in and have a look at the transaction codes. So which transaction codes are executed as part of this? Well, in this case, I can have a look at the, for instance, the delivery here, and you can see there's the standard transaction codes that we normally expect, VA02, VL02, and so forth. But there's also a custom transaction code. So now I actually have a picture of, for this particular process variant, of everything that's executed in this case, again, 20 to 100, so 80% of the business, those are the transactions. And you can go up here and see, VL02, 5,528 cases where it's invoked. That means this is a very heavy transaction, but also the custom transaction here has 5,310. So it's also a very important transaction code. So of course it pays to take a look at that transaction code to understand what's actually going on. Why is it? Is there a custom transaction code? What's it doing? But we can also go a step deeper. So from this, we can look at not only the transactions, but also at the underlying custom code. So here's an example of that. So if we go in here and take a look, this is just test data, but it'll give you an idea of what it is that we're doing. So we have the various systems and processes up here. And if we go down, you can see there's SD cells and then VA02. And if I click on this, you can see we found 39 objects that is being called as part of VA02 in the top layer. We can go 3 layers down even. So if custom code is calling custom code, that's calling custom code, we'll also get that into the list. And now we have a very clear picture of which programs, custom programs, that are being executed as part of VA02, and they can then be transferred to our S/4HANA readiness overview, and you'll be back at this picture that we saw before, where we start collating those various custom code elements in the relevant business processes and integration steps that we're looking at. So this is the scoping of an S4 project. Again, in some cases you'll see that you have very few or you have very little need for resources to get the code running on S4HANA. In other cases, it will be very complex, and then it makes sense to start drilling into that and seeing if you can scope further using the business process discovery. If we start looking at the performance then of the code, so one thing is now we found the 17 objects. This is how they're impacted by the HANA simplifications. The question is also, how is that code then performing in the productive environment? Is it worthwhile moving it as it is? Will we put a lot of unnecessary strain on S4HANA when we start moving this code? Is it, are we going to scale it up to a multitude of users compared to what we're doing today? And all those questions. So for that, it makes sense to start looking at the productive stats on the various programs. Again, like with everything else, you can attach multiple systems to Geckobrain. And right now, we're looking at the PE1 productive system. Of course, we track dumps. So if something is dumping regularly, it makes, excuse me, I certainly have a sore throat or something today. But we start looking at the dumps and see if there's something that is producing a lot of dumps, and that might be worthwhile having a look at before moving it. Again, if we found a business process that's very important, like for instance, we have a chain of supermarkets, and we found a program sitting in the replenishment process that was dumping. That's a very expensive dump, because if that dumps too much or too often or too late, that means that the replenishment for that night will not happen. And then next day you'll have supermarkets with empty empty shelves in terms of groceries or milk or whatever it is. So understanding that connection between the logical solution components, the business processes, and the code can be very very important. And in here we can see for these ones that we have a number of dumps. We can see how many users are affected. We can see what types of dumps we're talking about, where they happen, and so forth. We can also search for specific custom programs or whatever that may be to understand what's dumping the most. Even standard programs dumping, we'll see. You can see up here we have a new, so that means now something has just recently started dumping, affecting 5 users, and then we've got some here affecting 162 users. So we have an overview of what's actually going on. Here's 628 users affected by this particular dump. See which users they are, but we can also go and have a look at which version is the one that's producing the dumps. So if we look at the version here, it's one that's been introduced in February 2021. So that's where the problem lies. But it doesn't seem that it's dumping every day, so it might not be that dangerous. But next steps, if we go in, a very important stat or dashboard that we have here is looking at the web gateway. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there are a number of programs calling into SAP, and that number of programs will increase almost daily. A lot of money is being spent on web application development, Fiori apps, or data services, and so forth. And if you look at this here is quite interesting as well. You can see this is the number of users, and you can see it's just constantly growing. If we, I can only take last 12 months. But if you look at how that's moving, that's a very clear sign of increased usage. And you'll see that if you look at your own systems, you'll probably see a curve just like this one, or even more steep than this one. But we can have a look at how the external programs are calling into SAP and how they're using SAP. So you can see in this case, we've got a program with a data index of 1297 and a user index of 97. So there's a small drop in the number of users. Again, it's only 4, but still it has a dramatic increase in data and a dramatic increase in runtime. And we've often seen web applications being rolled out in pilots for only a few users, and then after that they'll be rolled out to a whole host of users. This customer will often have around 10,000 users on an application. So it pays to pay attention to all this, because if they're rolling it out to pilot users first, and the data index is going through the roof, and then after that they roll it out to 10,000 users, smoke will start coming out of the servers from SAP, because it's just way too much strain to put on the system. And if you're running in the cloud, it will be a lot of money to be paid to the hyperscaler, to Google Cloud or Azure or AWS, because they will charge you for the data. So understanding the data usage and the data management in those programs is really important. If we take a look at this down here, this is a terrible runtime, and data index is not overly bad, but still 57% up with only 1% increase. But something is definitely going on in this program. If we take a look at it, we can see some metadata that is taking the longest time. It's not it's not a whole lot of data that it seems to be sending, so might not be worthwhile improving on that one. If we go back to the other one, let me see if we take a look at this one, and we'll take a look at another one that's this site planner here. If we look at this one, it's got 12 endpoints, so operations set and so forth, and we can see where the data is, how the data is going and flowing. And for this particular customer, we actually had one where we could see that the data index had, and that was rolled out as a pilot to 100 users, and the data index kept going up. For each user, it just exploded. And when we analyzed the customer analyzed the endpoints, they could see that they made a call into a vendor list, and what they needed in the web application was one vendor. So they made a call. The web application developer found the endpoint where they could ask for vendors. But what they did was they asked for all vendors. They got 26,000 rows every time they just needed one. And that was that was discovered in the pilot phase, which was actually successful at that point. Everybody's ready to roll it out because all users had given their thumbs up in terms of UX and user interface. So everybody was happy, but we could see that the data was really heavy, and it turned out these 26,000 rows were fetched every time they needed one. So imagine that was rolled out to 10,000 users, and every time they needed one, they asked for 26,000. So, and again, had this customer been with a cloud provider, then they would have to pay for the 25,999 rows they didn't need. And if it was between regions, which it often is, that would have been very expensive. So understanding the next step, so the back end of what the web application developers do, is just immensely important in these days. And this is important today. It's important after migration, even if it's on-prem, because again, even with on-prem, you'll need more servers for unnecessary data, or cloud, because it'll cost you if you use too much data. So this is the sort of the next or the optimization step of what Geckobrain does, and a very important step of that. So if we just sum it up here, we can say for the performance tuning piece, saving, again, in some cases up to 25% on data. We had one customer recently that acquired another company, and they needed to take that company onto their own SAP server. So their SAP system had to be moved to their server center, data center. And that was not big enough. And they were in the process of considering whether they should be moving to a hyperscaler or not. So they weren't really inclined to invest in more servers. But with Geckobrain, they analyzed their custom code and the users of the custom code, and that was able to save them 15% on the data. And that actually allowed for room for this acquisition they've done on the existing servers. So you can say it was a saving that they didn't expect because they acquired that company, but they would have had to buy a chunk of new servers if they hadn't had the Geckobrain to analyze for them. And then secondly, optimize them. So optimize the Fiori apps, the web apps. Makes a lot of sense. There's no point in, again, if you could see there was a site planning application before, that would be some people standing out on in the middle of nowhere and calling into using the web application to get some data on very slow lines very often. So again, sending too much data in that case doesn't make any sense. Or we can see that the runtime in SAP is bad. That might not be because of the web application developer. That might be because the program that they're using, they're calling the endpoints they're calling in SAP are badly written and could be optimized. So understanding the runtime, you can see there was one before going up to 31,000. That's a dramatic slowdown in runtime. If that is in the custom code, then have a look at that custom code, get that fixed as well. And then it's in general just monitoring the code performance of all the custom programs that are running. So not only web applications, but everything that's running in SAP. You'll often have green lights everywhere, but you'll have 10 users that complain on a regular basis. Like you saw before, we're tracking the dumps, we're tracking the performance of all the various custom programs, and we'll see those 10 users. So it might be green lights on an average basis, but there might be a small group of users in a certain business process or in a specific location maybe that will have very slow response times. We'll find those so that they don't have to report in and create tickets. It can be done long before, but it can also be just managing the quality of the custom code before it goes to production. So very often, once the code has been transported to production, if the quality is bad, then you have to go back, have to raise a ticket, you have to go through everything, redevelop, test, and all those things. If, as we're able to figure out before the code goes into production if there are any known performance issues with that code. So that means that you can call it the cost of low quality can be very high in an SAP organization because it is a very heavy process to develop, test, release, and in order to the higher we can get the quality from the get-go, the lower the cost. So we help with that. That also means that it's easier to talk to and manage the quality of the outsourcing vendors, the development companies that you work with. And for the S/4HANA, as mentioned, to understand the complexity, how much time is needed, is it possible, is it not possible, should we go greenfield, brownfield, all those decisions can be made in using the Geckobrain tool. So again, it is not a tool to substitute existing SAP tools. It's a tool to improve on what's already there, to make it even more clear and transparent in the migration process. So understanding exactly, you need 50 days to move to S/4HANA, to move the custom code to S/4HANA, is a very valuable information to have. Very often it's been a kind of a bit of a black box. And then again, using process mining to minimize the scope. And then finally, you can say for the actual migration project, you can minimize the scope, you can track the progress, the number of tools in Geckobrain to help keep track of the progress of the code migration project. Okay, I think those are the most important things on that. The final thing I want to show you is on the deployment side. So how is Geckobrain deployed? It is quite an easy deployment. An account will be created for you in Geckobrain, and you will install a Geckobrain extractor, which is a simple transport of copies in your SAP system. It's SAP certified. You'll install that in your dev system. As long as there's RFC connection between dev and production, we are able to fetch the necessary production data, which is still metadata from your production system, and push that to the Geckobrain account. And then the analysis will be ready. So in those terms, as soon as you've installed the Geckobrain extractor and defined if you need to define any check variants in SAP Code Inspector, well, the data will be sent to Geckobrain. If you're doing an S/4HANA scan, again, because you can't scan for S/4HANA on an ECC system, in those cases, you'll set up a satellite system to do the scan as a remote scan as per SAP's own instructions. So that's also a very simple operation. Then the Geckobrain extractor will just be installed on that empty NetWeaver 752 box that sits next to your, or in the same system landscape, and just performs the remote scanning. Typically, for insights, as you can also see in our offer today, with the 3 months free for the fastest 10, first 10, it's possible to we keep it running, because one thing is understanding in a snapshot view how is the performance in my code, but understanding again, like you can see data indexes, which way is it moving, is it going up or down. We also correlate the various trends, so we can see one thing going up, something else going down, a third thing going up, and we start looking for those trends using our machine learning algorithms that are looking for patterns or unusual patterns or good patterns in your data, in order to start educating you on what is important to focus on, so you don't have to focus on everything. Again, most customers will have thousands and thousands and thousands of custom objects. You can't focus on all of them. So figuring out which of the 10 that are important these days is really important in the optimization process. And again, as part of the S/4HANA migration project, which ones are important to focus on in an S/4HANA migration project is what Geckobrain does in that sense. Typically, the implementation time of Geckobrain is less than a week, and then as soon as everything is set up on your end, the results are available. Typically the next day in Geckobrain. So quite straightforward setup that we're talking about here. Okay, so that was a presentation from my end. Mamta, and I don't know if there are any questions that has come in during my long speech here.
Thank you, Jens, for that wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.
Yes, we do have some questions, so I'll start with the first one. It says,
Sure.
Does Geckobrain support any Department of Defense clients currently?
We have the ability to do an on-prem installation of Geckobrain. It's being rolled out here in August for it's not a military customer, but a very security conscious customer, and that will be installed in their own landscape, in their own environment, and that means that no data is being sent outside of their own existing landscape at all. So that is possible. It's built using Kubernetes technologies, so and containerized that base. That means that we can actually install it. We need though to have access to root access to that server where it's installed in order to provide support. But other than that, everything is running inside the same landscape.
Okay, thank you. The next question is Geckobrain FedRAMP compliant?
If we're what compliant? Sorry about that. I'm not sure I understood that.
It says FedRAMP, F-E-D-R-A-M-P. Are we familiar with that? FedRAMP?
I doubt it, because I have never heard FedRAMP before. We're a Danish company, and FedRAMP sounds American to me. I'm not. We don't have any certification to that extent, so I would probably have to say no in order to answer that. But the truth is, I'm not entirely sure it is. But I'll be happy to see if I can figure out what it is and whether it's something that we live up to. But we do not have any FedRAMP type certifications in Geckobrain.
Okay. The next one is, do you need a live connection with SAP system, or do you download the information from the system?
Yeah, it is possible to do a sort of an asynchronous exercise where it's downloaded and then uploaded to the Geckobrain account. Volkswagen in Germany has done that for one of their divisions. That was where there were some security concerns. They did not want to. We only use port 80. So for those that understand a bit of technology, the only thing that you have to do is to be able to push data from SAP using port 80. We're not putting any data back into SAP. We're not updating anything. But some will have issues with that. Also, some banks have those limitations. So in those cases, you can do a local scan. So instead of pushing the results directly to Geckobrain, they can be downloaded and then uploaded into Geckobrain. So that is a possibility. It's not very good because, if you want to keep track of things on an ongoing basis, it makes no sense. And that's where the real value lies. Again, for a quick assessment, yes, then you can see, you have 100 days of work to get on S4HANA, but you don't understand how the code is performing productively and so forth. But it is a possibility, but it's not, it's not best. It's not the best way to do it.
Okay. So attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the questions window, and we'll be happy to answer any more questions or any follow-up questions to what Jens has already answered. So I'm going to resort to some frequently answered questions at this time. One of them is, why should a client use Geckobrain when SAP provides a HANA readiness tool?
That is a very good question. It is because the SAP HANA readiness tools are good. The reason we started Geckobrain was actually because we were ourselves involved in a HANA upgrade project, and it turned out the initial or the SAP tools weren't good enough in terms of understanding the custom code and the work to be done with the custom code. As you saw before, that customer that showed 530 priority 1 issues. If you'd use SAP, which we did back then, we just hired an SI to fix all the issues. But it turned out, then you have to test 530 issues. You have to figure out if they fixed 530 issues. And in many cases, we're talking false positives or code that doesn't have any impact. And in that case, as you can see, you can cut it down to fixing like 200 issues instead. And that makes a lot more sense because then you only have to test 200 issues. So Geckobrain does not, I think I said that, it doesn't substitute any SAP tools. They all do good work, like the S4HANA readiness assessments and everything else. We just run alongside them to provide a deeper insight into specifically the custom code and the custom code's connection to the business processes. SAP does not have any tools that can do that for you. And again, they've also got the Solution Manager, which is a wonderful tool, very, very complex, very difficult to work with, but it can give you a lot of data. We keep track of data on a more granular level than Solution Manager. So again, Solution Manager is good for Solution Manager does, but we just add to that. We just provide even more value and deeper insight. So it's our nerdy background. It's good what SAP has, but what Geckobrain has is much better. if you want to really understand how you're impacted and you want to save money and minimize the risk. That's where you need Geckobrain. So it's an addition to existing tools, not a replacement.
Wonderful. Well, definitely a lot of good reasons to go with Geckobrain. There is one question from an attendee. Is there a demo link that they can click on to maybe walk through the whole process? Is there a link like that we can provide to the attendees?
Well, it's very simple. They can simply go to geckobrain.com and there will be videos in there. I think we have created a presentation on Loom, and if you hold on, I can paste it in here. Should I do that, or do you just want to send it around with a video where I give a quick tour of everything?
Yes, we can include it with the follow-up.
Okay, good. I'll send that to you after the call today.
Sounds good.
But there also are some videos on Geckobrain that shows everything on geckobrain.com.
Sounds good. Geckobrain.com. That's where you want to go, attendees, if you want to access this link right away. There is another question here. If there's a lot of unused code from before, say some projects may have been decommissioned, but still underlying code exists, or enhancements, will the solution help to determine custom code which are not captured by Readiness SAP Solution Manager?
No, we'll find the same. So you can see here, here's an example of that. Like you saw before, in this case, they have, you know, if you look at the objects, we say there are 247 objects with a number of issues. But if we import UPL, that's cut down to 95. The rest are not in use. And you can see it actually down here. In this case, out of the total custom code, not relevant means code has not been used. So in this case, it's 38% of the code. Now, you don't want to use Geckobrain. This is again an example of where we just work very well alongside existing tools. You don't want to use Geckobrain to do code decommissioning because CCLM is perfect for that. So you'll simply use CCLM to do a decommissioning project. But again, you've got to be running SCMon or UPL for at least 14 months before you start decommissioning any code. Otherwise, you'll risk, you know, removing all the programs that are being used for, you know, the year-end close or something like that. But those tools will help you do that. As a CCLM is a good tool for that. And you can decide, you know, do you want to do code decommissioning before you migrate or after migration? And I'd say most of our customers actually decided to do it after. And that means they just need to fix everything because it can't compile if you don't fix it before you move it. But oftentimes they simply just fix everything, move it, and then start looking at the decommissioning project afterwards. But that can be done before or after. But if you're not fixing the code, you've got to remove it because otherwise, you can't run S for HANA because it's not compiled.
Okay. Well, the next question I have for you is, do I need to remediate the custom code for the HANA database changes when I'm migrating to S/4HANA and not to Suite on HANA?
Yes, you still need to make the same changes. So these changes come on top of the simplification issues. Both need to be done when moving to S/4HANA. But very often, again, this is also a tip. You can see here Geckobrain can fix 230 out of 244 issues. But if you're moving straight to S/4HANA, probably you don't even want to use Geckobrain's automatic code remediation for that. You might as well just use SAP's quick fixes. So again, there's an SAP tool that works. It works in Eclipse. That means you can only use it when you're moving to S/4HANA, but that can also fix missing order buys automatically. So when you're fixing the code for a simplification issue anyway, you might as well, go choose a development class or whatever you want to choose, and then fix the missing order buys in a batch run using quick fix instead. So again, we have tools for that, but in some cases, it's just easier to use SAP.
Okay. How do you or Geckobrain categorize small, medium, large, or extra large issues in S4 assessment?
Yes, that's a very good question. That is based on the collective knowledge of my team of ABAP experts. So we have been on each and every one. Again, we've been involved in a number of S4HANA migration projects, of course, but on top of that, they've been through all of these issues, all these simplification issues. And at each one of them, they have been and created a joint estimate of how much time does it take, or how complex is it? Is it extra small, small, medium, large, extra large? So what's the complexity of that based on their 30 years of knowledge each? And then on top of that, also looking at what's then the time needed to make that type of fix. So it's that is the you can say that's the secret sauce of Geckobrain, that is knowledge in order to make those estimates.
Okay, I believe there might be just time for one last question. How can Geckobrain's insights help a client with pre, during, and post S/4HANA and cloud migration?
Well, it helps in giving an overview of, you can say we provide observability into the custom code, meaning that you'll always know how the custom code is performing. So you can start optimizing long before an S/4HANA journey. We have many customers that, they don't expect to move to S/4HANA in the next 2-3 years, but there's no point in having worse and worse and worse code coming into the SAP system. This one is a very good example of that. So this customer specifically on this system, you can see here, we track the progress. I think I mentioned that before. So you can see here, there's made some automatic remediation, some manual efforts. At this point in 2017, they stopped this particular project for this particular system. And at that time, there was about 340 days of work left to fix the code. Again, this is the full amount. So this is before the ones that are that are not necessary to move and all those things. But the interesting thing is not this. This is how it looked in May 2017, 340 days. Now look at today, 838 days. So the figure you get from this is that 500 more days of work has been added in 4 years to the S/4HANA project for this customer, just by waiting, because they haven't kept track of this. So the longer you wait, the more issues you get. And for one reason only, developers have not learned the new ways. They keep introducing HANA incompliant and S/4HANA incompliant code. They keep introducing code that is not optimized. All those things, they're good programmers, bad programmers, then they're good programmers with bad days, and all these things. That means your code will always be unstable, and it will always be a very a key factor for performance issues, or as you can see here, HANA issues. This will happen. This is just for HANA. You see the same with dumps, with everything else, that there'll just be more and more problems introduced in the code. By having Geckobrain Insights running, we keep it clean. So that means this would have gone down further in order to make sure that the code is always optimized, and there's no point in having bad code in your SAP system. And turning it around, talking about S/4HANA, we will also be able to show you very early on, this is the impact that you're looking at. Now you can already start now thinking about, do you want to do greenfield, brownfield? And if you do brownfield, what kind of, do you want to do everything or selective brownfield? You can start planning that and getting an overview of where in the processes your code sits. So the second you start start using Geckobrain, you start saving money. So it's actually a very simple decision, I'd say. Plus, along the journey, when you start doing HANA and S/4HANA, then you just add that to Geckobrain and you start looking at those figures as well. That was a long answer, I know.
Thank you so much. Well,
You're
it's
welcome.
just about at the top of the hour. I would like to thank all the attendees and the panelists for joining this webinar today. I hope all the attendees found this worthy of your time and you learned a lot of new information. Please feel free to connect with Terra Information Group at terrainformation.com, on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please contact us if you have any questions. You will receive the recording of this presentation via email as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.
Bye.